Americans value their heritage. It's one that makes possible the pursuit of happiness, a pursuit God approves of. Sadly, many think pursuing happiness means not pursuing the will of God. They falsely think the two are mutually exclusive. Today, we'll hear some final thoughts and then ask some questions about this common misconception. Stay with us. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. We're in a series on 10 lies about God and why you might already be deceived. Today, Erwin Lutzer is speaking on lie number 9, that we must choose between God's will and our happiness, and how we lose our joy through worry.
So God said to me, how do you expect to find your delight in me when you're focused on one little thing that you can't do anything about? Isn't that the ultimate foolishness? So we have to deal with that. We have to give those matters over to God so that these stray thoughts of anxiety don't come into our minds. And then there's such things as bitterness. Let me tell you the truth about Jonathan Edwards. Of course, I always tell you the truth, so I wouldn't have had to preface that with those remarks. But just in case, for those of you who are wondering, let me tell you a true story. Here's America's premier evangelist. You've all heard of him in the Great Awakening. Marvelous preacher who sometimes read his messages, at least at the beginning. He's the one, who preached sinners in the hands of an angry God, and people actually held onto the pew and trembled because they thought that the earth was going to open up right then and that the final harvest would take place while he spoke, we read. Edwards was voted out of his church on a technical issue that I won't go into. An issue, by the way, that he was completely right about. But a shirt-tailed relative stirred up all kinds of controversy regarding him, and consequently all this dissatisfaction spread within the church. They had a vote, and I think that he was ousted something like 230 opposed to 32 for. So he left the church. Well, that's a difficult pill to swallow. Some of you have gone through like that in your business. You've gone through all kinds of injustices. I know it because injustice permeates the globe. But this is what his biographer said. And this would have been worthwhile you coming to hear this sermon if you'd have only heard this. Are you ready for it? Because you can't miss this. His happiness in God was beyond the reach of his enemies. His happiness in God was beyond the reach of his enemies. There is a place of quiet rest near to the heart of God, a place where sin cannot molest, near to the heart of God. Oh, Jesus, blessed Redeemer, sent from the heart of God. Yes, there is that place where your happiness in God is beyond the reach of your enemies. They can't get to it because God continually delights your soul. Now, to complete the story, Edwards actually left the church and went to live with the Indians. And providentially, it was an excellent idea because it is there that he had more time and he wrote all those good books that some of us still continue to read today, which probably would not have been written if he had remained a pastor. He could see, therefore, within even injustice, the providence of God because his soul delighted in the Lord. So you take care of all those things. And then what you discover is that there is joy in God. There really is. There really is. Fanny Crosby, was not born blind. As I mentioned in another message, she had perfectly good eyesight, but a little bit of rash when she was born around her eyes, and a doctor had some salve in those days that he thought was going to cure her, and it made her blind. Burned out her little newborn eyes. She was not bitter over it because she accepted that too as God's providence. But one day, in a song that we're going to sing in a moment, she included this stanza. Oh, the pure delight of a single hour that before thy throne I spend, when I kneel in prayer and with thee, my God, commune as friend with friend. Of course you were born to desire pleasure. There's no other way that we can operate. But I encourage you today, go for the great pleasures. Go for God. Go for the delights. Go for that which is best for you. Go for your relationship with the Almighty, this happy God who commands us, delight thyself in the Lord, and say, I will not rest until I've come to know Him. And I will have that quiet time before I leave for work in the morning. And I will pursue Him, and I will deal with the issues that keep me from knowing Him. Because remember, He rewards those who diligently seek Him out. What do you mean this business of saying, we live a very boring life because we don't do worldly pleasures? No. You live with the pleasures at God's right hand forevermore.
There's just something about forbidden fruit. Seems like if it's not okay to do it, you want to do it even more.
Want to have kids walk across your lawn? Put up a sign that says, do not walk on the grass.
Absolutely. It seems like there's an built into all of our human natures is the thought that if it's any fun, God's not going to like it. And if it really is a lot of fun, He's going to like it even less. And so we've got to make this hard choice. Do I obey God or do I have a good time? Now you're saying, Pastor Lutzer, in this sermon, the radical concept that God wants us to have a good time.
Absolutely, in this sense. God wants us to be joyful. God wants us to delight. God wants us to be fulfilled. Let's put it in those terms.
Sure.
And the reason that we know that is because, first of all, He is a delightful God. How could we possibly delight ourselves in the Lord if God Himself was not delightful? The simple fact is God rejoices in His creation. He rejoices in His Son. There's much that gives Him glory, and He invites us to participate with Him in that.
You basically said God Himself has many pleasures. He delights in His people.
And He created us to seek pleasure. That is not a sin. Our sin is that we seek for pleasure and fulfillment in all the wrong places, and we don't find it in God.
Now, you mentioned that our temptation is to seek